All right, welcome back to College Football Addiction. I've got Graham Coffee, Dog Central, on with us. Appreciate BetUS for their support. We'll talk about them a little bit later. But all right, coming off the bye week, Graham in the driver's seat for the SEC and heading into a pretty big rivalry game. What's the mood right now?
I mean, I think the mood for Georgia fans is like, this is what we were waiting for. This is kind of what we thought this team could be. The version that they saw of Georgia down in Austin. I also think, look, old time Georgia fans know better than anybody that Georgia Florida is a rivalry where there's a lot of history of the team that's maybe coming into this game a little under the radar, creeping up and biting the team that's kind of having the better season. So I think there's some optimism. I think Georgia fans are excited about the performance they saw against Texas, but also want to see Georgia come out and play well early in this game against Florida and not kind of sleepwalk down in Jacksonville and get themselves into trouble.
Yeah, I do. I was going to ask you about that. Just the mindset. Like UGA is a 21-point favorite. Nobody's going to pick UF in this game. Even the most diehard UF fans that are excited about Lagway or the future or things that we'll ask you about. But UF, though, absolutely fighting for their lives and for their coach's job at to some degree. Um, is it a tougher job for Kirby to have to motivate these guys? Like, or is the rivalry in its name enough to not have them overlooking an opponent like UF? Whereas if you were playing anybody else that was a 21 point underdog, you might worry about an overlook situation.
I think Kirby has like a great respect for this rivalry. He played in it, in '97. Georgia went down to Jacksonville. They had lost, I think, 7 in a row to Spurrier's, kind of prime Florida Gators. And Florida was number one in the country, and Georgia ambushed, beat them by 20 points, and Kirby was on that team. That was his senior year. And I think he has always treated this game a little bit differently than he treats kind of any other regular season games. I think he got beat. He was on the field as a backup, I think, freshman safety, maybe a sophomore, but he was on the field as a backup when Spurrier ran like a reverse pass to set Florida up to be the first team to ever hang 50 points in Sanford Stadium back in like '95 when the old Gator Bowl was being renovated down in Jacksonville. So there's a lot of history there, like with Kirby and this Florida rivalry, and he kind of hates Florida the same way that Spurrier hated Georgia because of the way that some of Vince Dooley's teams kind of foiled Steve's career at times. So I think that you will see him really like stress the kind of the randomness or the physical nature of this game and just the way that things happen. He did that earlier this year against Auburn, and Georgia had probably one of their more like consistent performances of the season. It wasn't a beautiful blowout win, but it was a comfortable 18-point win over a rival. The game never really felt like it was in doubt. I think that that's kind of the goal for Georgia this week is to come into this game and I don't think you can replicate the excitement, the build up, and the doubt that existed in the build up to that Texas game. But I think you can come into this game and have a healthy respect for it and make sure that you don't kind of show up and get caught sleeping for a half or something and find yourself into a 4-quarter ball game.
Yeah. UF has won a couple of games that, I think everybody wrote them off completely after the A&M game, but they've won a couple of games since then. They, played okay against Mississippi State. In fact, maybe a little bit better than, Mississippi State's actually played, fairly well at times for their pretty awful record. Beat Mississippi State, beat UCF, held them down pretty well. They were an underdog at home to Kentucky and won that game as about as convincingly as you could. And then honestly, probably should have beaten Tennessee if Billy Napier could have kind of gotten out of his own way.
Yeah.
They haven't beaten anybody great yet. Obviously that's probably fair to say it, but they've lost to 3 top 15-ish teams. Just 30,000 foot view on Florida right now. I'll get right back to chatting with Graham, but first, if you want to bet on this 21-point spread, you can go over to BetUS and use our code YouTube150 to get a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit. Your next 2 deposits are 125% bonus. All of that up to $2,000. BetUS has some of the best lines and best customer service in the game. Make sure that you're betting with BetUS today.
I mean, I think Florida's Good. I mean, like, I think they are a good football team. I don't think they're a great football team, but I certainly wouldn't call them a bad football team. They, I think, responded to that Miami loss after week one better than anyone thought, considering all the doubt that's existed around Napier. I think a lot of folks just kind of figured you got blown out in this game that you've kind of built up towards all season. Where do you go from here? You probably lay down. And they didn't. Credit Graham Mertz for that. I think that they've had some strong leaders on that team, Mertz being one of them. I think that's kind of the interesting part of this now is I know that Graham Mertz was not necessarily like a big play machine, but he was a guy who kept them on schedule and kind of like kept them in football games and didn't make really like disastrous errors that kind of put them behind the eight ball. You saw them in the second half against Tennessee. Like Lagway was able to put together that touchdown drive off kind of a short field, but that's the question, right? Is like I think Lagway has that big play potential, but I think there's also the situation of just having a true freshman quarterback, and could he send a pick six the other way? Could he have kind of some crippling mistakes? Like this reminds me a lot of 2021 coming into this game, kind of realizing that they were going to play Anthony Richardson, who at the time was an unexperienced young quarterback, and being like, oh man, he has the potential to run the ball 70 on you at any point in time. He's also got the potential to turn it over and kind of, beat themselves. So that's the task, I think, for Florida is how do you get the boom without the bust from Lagway here in this game. And like the task for Georgia really is, I think, just to kind of be sound enough defensively and keep things in front of you and sort of trust that like this guy at this point in his career is probably not going to be able to drive the field on you in small chunks, right? Like
No.
if you don't give up the explosive 30, 40-yard play, it's hard to see them maybe, putting together more than one drive or two drives in this game where like they go 75 yards, right? Like I think there's going to be a pretty heavy correlation in this game for Florida's point total between did they have an explosive on that drive or not.
Yeah. Which is really how it was incredible. Like he had the weirdest stat line like I think I've ever seen. Like at one point he was like 4 for 11 or 5 for 11 for like 170 yards or something ridiculous. Like it was just bomb after bomb after bomb. And his deep ball is really pretty and it is
Yeah.
really effective. Everything short to intermediate was incredibly poorly thrown. And so, yeah, like it's almost like, if you sit back, if you're Georgia and say like, you will not beat us deep, can he put enough together underneath against clearly Georgia has, some different athletes than Kentucky does. So, what about the ETN effect?
Yeah.
This is a fun aspect of the game. Like, Kirby wants to win the game ultimately, right? Like, and so like, I don't think he's going to do anything that like impact, like going to go to a guy too much, but it's also your RB1. So it's not like you're trying to like go to
Yeah.
a guy just to be fun, but like, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Kirby was petty enough to like make sure that ETN has like 3 touchdowns in this game,
Look, I mean, Kirby, like, Kirby's a guy who's pretty honest with the media about like most things. If you ask him questions about his football team, but there's certain things that you can't be totally honest about as a coach under any circumstances. But like one thing that I am 100% confident of from following and covering this man for the last 9 seasons is that this dude hates Florida. Like he hates Florida with the fire of 1,000 suns. And if there's anything that he can do to kind of twist a knife, he's gonna do it. The only times like I've ever really like watched a game, and really since 2017 when the Georgia program like got on the map and went to the national title game. Like the only games I've watched and been like, Kirby might be kind of like running the score up right now have been against Florida. And you look at 2017, he gets McElwain fired. Like that was the game that got McElwain fired. 2021, he gets Mullen fired. The same, So like he's 2 for 2 on getting Florida coaches fired the week that he plays them. I don't think he's going to get Napier fired this week. Like I don't think that ship is going to sail right now. But I do think like he'll do what he can to twist the knife, and they'll trot out Julian Humphrey as a starting corner on Saturday. Like they flipped him after he'd been committed to Florida for a long time when Mullen got fired. Like there's a sort of delight I think that Georgia takes in torturing Florida a little bit at this point after Florida tortured Georgia for a couple decades, right? Like this rivalry is swung in both directions. It's not like a little brother big brother scenario. It's just Georgia had kind of a time where they were on top of Florida through the 70s and the 80s, and then Florida was all over Georgia for the 90s and 2000s, and now Georgia's kind of got the upper hand again. So I think they'll enjoy it. ETN, it's an interesting question because I thought against Texas, like, especially early in that game before the half when Texas adjusted, it was like, dude, feed him the rock. Like, he's gashing them right now. And they've tried to kind of limit his carries, and I think a lot of that's because they've got injuries behind him in the running back room. Branson Robinson is out with a sprained MCL right now. Roderick Robinson has been hurt all year. So they're really down to Nate Frazier, who's a true freshman, and he's a really good back, but he's also a true freshman. And then after that, like, you've got Cash Jones, the walk-on from Texas with, like, a great porn stash, and you've got, Chauncey Bowens, who was also committed to Florida at one point, is in there. But, like, it's a lot of unproven guys. It's a lot of young guys. So I think if you had a full running back room, this might be the week you saw Etienne go touch it like 24 times. But I think they got to be careful because they got to go to Ole Miss in a week, and, like, they need him to win that game.
Florida has looked better along the front. Their offensive line has protected a bit better than they did earlier in the year. Now, obviously, Georgia has a different level of defensive line than they will have seen really since the Miami game. Do you think that Georgia, like, how much of it is them trying to, like, get after Lagway, or do you think has Georgia historically, like, spied mobile quarterbacks? Are his legs enough of a threat to do that? Like, how do you think they play that on Saturday?
I think his legs are definitely enough of a threat for them to do that. The thing with Kirby at Georgia, like, years ago, he kind of ran a study of, where mobile quarterbacks were hurting his defenses. And he found that, like, what really killed him was when guys could step up on third down, like, into the interior gaps. It never really hurt them when somebody had to flush out the side of the pocket and go towards the sidelines. But, like, they really don't like it if a quarterback can step up on 3rd and 9 and, can just go upfield. So there will be a lot of emphasis for Georgia on being disciplined in their rush lanes with the defensive line is my expectation. And then I think they'll spy him in certain situations. Jalen Walker, even with Ewers, like, they kind of used him like a spy on a lot of third downs. But Georgia's spy rules are basically that if you're spying somebody and you see an open kind of rush lane develop and you can get to the quarterback, that emphasis on no, like, you better get home if you go, then you can go and take off. So I think they'll use some of that kind of, like, creeper sort of spy look and just have Walker, sit sort of behind his defensive line. And if somewhere opens up, he'll take off. And if Lagway flushes, he'll obviously take off. I expect Georgia to kind of vary things for DJ. Like, they will want to make him uncomfortable early. And, with Jalen Walker and then Michael Williams looking kind of healthy and back in the fold in a way that he really hadn't been since the Clemson game, I expect them to be successful doing that. Like, I think they'll be able to run some stuff at him and just kind of, even if they don't sack him early, I think the goal is to, get in his face, affect throws, and knock him down, make him sort of feel like they're there and see if they can hurry him into some bad decisions. So I expect them to kind of come early, especially if they can get Florida in 3rd and longs. And then at some point they'll run some of the simulated stuff they did against Texas. And, like, it'll look like they're going to bring 6 and they'll bring 3 and try to step into a throwing lane and, take one the other way.
Yeah. Florida's defense has, really since their bye week, has certainly improved. They were able to hold a pretty potent UCF rushing attack down. I thought, did a pretty good job against Tennessee, holding Tennessee down, though Tennessee kind of like shoots itself in the foot at times too. And then obviously Kentucky doesn't have a prolific offense by any means, but they did a pretty good job against Kentucky as well. I would expect Beck to bounce back, but he didn't have his best performance by any means against Texas. Just thoughts on, can UF's defense, against a much better offense at times, can UF's defense do it again, or does their defense worry you at all, or just thoughts on that matchup?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think for Georgia, the offense has been so kind of week to week that it's fair to have some concern from a Georgia perspective of like, what is this going to look like? I think Georgia's going to want to like run the ball in this game. They really, and when I say that, I say that with also the caveat of the health issues they have at running back we just talked about. So like they'll run a lot of these like perimeter screens and stuff like that. That's going to be an extension of their running game, but obviously they'll go on Carson Beck's stat line at the end of the day. I think for Georgia in this game, like you can probably pick on some spots at the safety positions and sort of over the middle and the linebackers kind of outside of Shamar. Like I think you can do some things with your tight ends and your running backs out of the backfield, but the question will just be like where along the way in this game do they go downfield and how successful are they doing that? Against Texas, they kind of got up and they were having the turnover issues and they pretty much abandoned anything vertical or over the middle of the field for like a quarter and a half until that game got back to 8 points, and then they went back to it and they scored and then they abandoned it again. So I think there's a gear there when Georgia needs it from like a more kind of downfield passing game standpoint. But you better hope Carson Beck's seeing the field. Like that's the real story, right? Is just he didn't really see the field well in that Texas game, and it almost cost them dearly at times. And then he figured it out a little bit when they really, really needed him to in the early fourth quarter. But I don't know. I really don't. Like I watched him throw for 450 on Mississippi State, and I kind of thought that they would go down to Austin and like bombs away, and then they came out and had this dominant defensive performance. And I think a lot of things that maybe were in the offensive game plan, like just kind of set there on the table, and they didn't pull those cards because they didn't need them. So we'll see. I think a lot of this will depend on what the kind of pace and like script of this game looks like early, and how well Florida's moving the ball on offense is probably going to dictate some of how aggressive Georgia is.
Yeah, makes sense. I certainly, it is early in the week. We're doing this on a Monday night, and so, I assume you're not going to pick UF at this point to come in and upset UGA as a 3-touchdown dog. But do you think, if you had to pick early in the week, do you think Georgia covers the spread?
I mean, I think for Florida, like this is, they've had 2 weeks to get ready for this game, and I think this is kind of their season in a way. Like if they win this game, then a lot of things are on the table. Like there's a lot of conversations you can start having about Florida, and like there's a lot of conversations that change about Napier if they win this game. So I expect Georgia to get their best shot. I expect Florida's offensive staff to have some things drawn up to try and take advantage of different matchups in Georgia's back end. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they come out with a really good script and scheme up a touchdown. I like Georgia to kind of pull away late in this game, but 21 feels like a lot to me. I'm going to say, I kind of see this game more in that like 13 to 17 point range, less so in that, 3-4 touchdown range. But the other side of that is the variance that comes in with a kid like Lagway back there. Like I covered DJ at Elite 11. He's a great talent. He's a great kid. Like he's going to be a star in not just college football, but I think beyond, truthfully. But he's so young, and what Georgia's defensive staff can do to a young quarterback can sometimes lead to turnovers, and things can kind of take bounces where you may have Georgia start with some short fields or get a defensive touchdown obviously that kind of breaks a lot of these like scenarios we're talking about with how we see this game scripting out. So that's the big variance question to me is like, how many turnovers does Georgia get? Does Georgia get a defensive touchdown? Because if they do, if you told me, come 7 p.m. on Saturday night, Georgia's going to have a defensive touchdown, I would say they probably will cover that spread.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it also plays back into what you talked about with Texas. Like, how much does Kirby really feel the need to get into the bag if they've controlled the whole game by 17? Do they just kind of go into, hey, we're going to run the ball and we're going to milk we need to get out of here healthy. We need to get on to Oxford. As much as you want to run it up against a rival, which is always fun, you also just, there are bigger goals for Georgia at this point, I think, in the season. Graham, where can people follow you? Where can they get more of your content?
Check us out, dogcentral.com. If you're a Georgia fan, since we didn't have a game recap this week, I posted kind of a deep dive story on all the events of Georgia's 2021 quarterback room that went from JT Daniels being a preseason Heisman candidate to Stetson Bennett, ultimately leading them to the title. So that's kind of a fun read if you're looking for something from the UGA perspective. But yeah, check us out, dogcentral.com. You can find me on Twitter at Graham Coffee DC. And yeah, that's about it, man.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you. Have fun this weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good, man.
Appreciate Graham Coffee for jumping on with me to chat Georgia, Florida. Make sure that you stay tuned as we will chat with a Florida insider about the game from their perspective as well this week. And again, appreciate BetUS for their support on today's video.